Welcome back to Approaching Affinity, the show where we focus on all things finance, innovation, and technology. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Eric Radez. He's the founder of Strategic Media and Public Relations, where he helps companies and causes tell their stories with precision and impact. He's also the longtime co-chair of the Chicago Resource Expo and an early innovator in investor engagement and transforming traditional conferences into multi-platform experiences. Finally, he's a true entrepreneur at heart, from launching an aftermarket car business before the Fast and the Furious to advising on natural resource portfolios, meaning he understands both the grind and the vision behind building meaningful ventures. Mr. Radez, welcome to the show. Anything I missed?
That was pretty comprehensive, Justin. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you. For our audience, you requested someone with experience in investor relations, investor conferences, setting those up, leading those, and what it took to get there. So we found Mr. Radez, and he seemed to be the perfect guest for these topics. So I want to open the floor up to you. So to say, the hero's journey. Where did you start? How did you get to where you were? Any hiccups along the way? The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me on, Justin. No, my journey as everybody started at a young age, and it kind of came from more of a hobby kind of a thing, where my buddies and I, we used to break engines apart and try to make them faster on our four-wheelers. And then once I got old enough to have a car, this is in the mid '90s, we all bought Hondas. We had Honda four-wheelers. We're like, well, you would have Honda Civics. So we all bought Hondas. My buddy got an Accord, so we started thinking, well, maybe we could take these things apart and make them go faster too. And we saw these hot rods around, all the V8s at the time, all the American muscle. We're like, well, I bet we could really try to do something here cool to make these things fast too, and maybe we keep up with those guys. So we proceeded to yank this engine out of my Honda Civic in my parents' garage. Had pieces everywhere, and figured out in California at that time, there were some guys that were making camshafts for the Civic and high compression pistons. And wow, well, we totally rebuilt that motor, man. And that car was a screamer. We took it out to the Indianapolis Raceway Park, where they had the U.S. Nationals on street legal drag night on Tuesdays. And, we smoked a Mustang on our first night out there. And wow, we really got a lot.
It's got to be impressive.
Oh, it was
especially on the first try.
It was unheard of, this is the mid '90s, and it was just, muscle cars were the thing. So these guys were really surprised to see a little Honda come out there and take them on the quarter mile. So, they just kind of like fueled this flame underneath us that drove us to just keep on looking for innovation on these cars and what we could do to make them faster. And then we had some guys like, hey, I got a Honda too. Do you think you could maybe help me do some work on it? And we're like, well, yeah, we could probably do that. So, gears start turning in, and, it took a couple years for us to, connect all the dots and to get our financing in place. I mean, I was 22 years old. And so, we were pretty wet behind the ears guys. I'd done a little college on the side there. So I was, doing 1,000 things at once. But we got the business open in 1998, and Indy Import Performance was the name. And, we were really a pioneer in the import performance market here in Indianapolis, which, I did for several years. And it was just an amazing part of my life. It was so fun. And, we got to be on TV a lot, and it taught me a lot about, business, bottom line, what it takes to get return customers and to treat people right,
Okay, so that was the foundation, more or less.
Absolutely. It taught me so much. And, I took the things I learned from that. And, I also, just a little side note, my grandfather ran the bingo game at the local American Legion. And when I turned 18, he started to had me come in and help sell pull tabs, at the bingo game. And, I just got so good at being, close to people and learning so many people's names. And, I just love to be around people. And so, that kind of passion to engage with strangers and make them be not strangers anymore just kind of fueled my passion to start that business. And and that to this day that's kind of who I am, and I'm just so grateful that I had to start like that out in my life.
That's impressive. I think it's definitely the social element of that, and expounding on that for all the way from the building out Honda Civics, beating muscle cars. You had, it seems like a very social upbringing, so to say.
It certainly was. And and then it was kind of interesting to see everything that happened as far as our business goes, because that was kind of the dawn of eBay, was in the late 90s. So we had modeled our business to be mainly, walk-in retail sales and mail order sales. And we did some service work where we actually did the wrenching on the cars in the back. But I quickly came to understand that competing with the prices on eBay was really difficult. These guys were getting the same prices that we were on a wholesale level, on a retail level. I was like, how can I compete with that? So, the business had some turbulence, and then I was like, I don't know, this model's good enough, and it's not, things weren't looking great. And so I had my dad in behind my ear. He's like, hey, Eric, if that's not working out, you're welcome. My dad was a stockbroker. He worked for as a stockbroker since the mid 70s. And he's like, hey, maybe you should consider coming and working with me. So, I gave it some thought, and I decided that's really what I wanted to do. So that's what I did. I left my business and went and joined my dad at a New York Stock Exchange firm. And I went through the whole rigmarole there, got my Series 7, 63, among some other certifications. And yeah, we got busy. So
I could tell.
I should
That
probably
must have been
back up.
social too.
Yeah. Oh, well, absolutely. I had to talk. He had a big book of clients. I had to meet all these people, and then the conferences. We'll get into that in a little bit. But, I think it's probably important for me right here to preface that, at a young age, and when I say young, I 10, 11 years old, I started, going with my dad. My dad was an ultra marathoner, and we went out to, out west a lot. And we went up to Leadville, Colorado, and he's like, hey, we're going to go, I'm going to run this race, but there's this guy I know has this mine up in the mountain here, this old mine property, and we're going to go check it out. I'm like, okay, I never seen a mine. So we went up there, and it was just some old workings in the side of a hill. It was probably some of the late 1800s, but it was still cool to look at rocks. And, geologist was there and say, oh, this is pyrite, this isn't gold. I found this chunk, and I thought I was a millionaire. And he's like, oh, sorry, that's pyrite. So I learned about that real quick. But so,
I think everyone's had that one.
Yeah, I felt silly. So, and then when I was 12 years old, my dad took me finally on my first real mining property tour down in Durango, Mexico, to visit a company called Avino Silver and Gold, which is ASM on the New York Stock Exchange. But I went and walked that property. We saw an explosion go off where they were blasting an open pit mine, and, rocks came through the ceiling of the building we were in. It was like, extremely dangerous stuff. But it gave me a true appreciation about how difficult it is to get gold, silver, any metal out of the ground, and why it costs so much. It's dangerous, hard work. It takes a lot of planning, and there's a lot of risk involved. So at a young age, I started digesting all these numbers and all this information. And then I love the geology of it. I love being out in nature. So it was just really everything about that kind of industry, and then diving into the company and making sure, their numbers make sense. It just really drew me in. And so when my dad came back to me and said, hey, Eric, if your car parts business isn't going so well, why don't you consider coming working with me? And I was just like, well, that just makes sense. Let's do it. So that's what I did. And it's been a fun ride ever since.
That's good. So, I mean, you started being a stockbroker, say, the early 90s, around that time frame?
It was 2002.
2002. Okay.
Yep.
Nice. That must have given you the trial by fire, I guess, so to say, over the years.
Sure. I was right after the dot-com crisis happened, and all that stuff. And, gold, I think when I started working with my dad, was maybe $300 an ounce. Look at where it is now. Yeah. It shows you the purchase price of the gold compared to the dollar. So, I wish I would have bought it back and then and just held on to it.
Yeah, a different story today. But
yes, sir.
Regardless, though, I mean, help me fill in the blanks here. So some of them, early on, you're doing your stockbroker for quite some time, learning lessons, I'm sure building the client book, or partnerships, etc. At what point did you and your dad decide to start the Chicago Resource Expo Center? Was it from those early experiences, seeing I'm already dropping the name. How do you pronounce the name of the gold mining stuff you mentioned?
Avino Silver and Gold.
Avino Silver. Is that kind of did that parlay, so to say, into the Chicago Resource Expo, or was it what happened there?
Well, that's a whole nother different omelet, but I'll give you a quick recipe. So in the late '70s, right when inflation, when that inflationary cycle took place, my dad, he had just became a broker, and my uncle was his big brother was already up at the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, and then they started getting into trading gold stocks like some of the Fontaine, some of the other African mining stocks. They
Hmm.
just went like crazy. And, so my dad started the Chicago Resource Expo. And technically at that time, it was the Chicago Natural Resource and Technology Conference, which I later rebranded. And he did it with a primary focus on increasing the size of his book. So, he would have mining company come in, or a few of them, and do their dog and pony show about what their mining company had up going on and why you should invest in it, yada, yada, yada. And then dad would bring in special guest speakers, and some really cool guys over the years. And, so he had that conference going throughout all my childhood. And it was just something in the peripheral, really, that I just didn't pay much attention to because I just didn't have any involvement in it yet. So when I started working with dad in the early 2000s and got my license, one of the things I also did with him was to help get that show to grow. And, I was a younger guy and I had some new ideas. And so we kind of massaged the situation a little bit, kind of changed the format of the show to bring in more people, make it more accessible, more approachable. And so that's what we did. I started working with him, and I live in Indianapolis, but we did all our events up there because Chicago's just got a bigger audience. So, that's twice a year we would do that show up there and take all kinds of stuff. And I mean, it was a 2-day event. We served food, and it was just a great time. It was a great time.
I can imagine.
It was
Excuse me.
always good. Met a lot of great people, heard a lot of amazing stories, and that's, and I saw, you know, companies that were trying to get themselves recognized by investors. And, I saw a lot of different methods that these companies were using to get that attention. And I saw a lot of people waste a lot of money on different strategies and gimmicks. And, at the end of the day, it came down to having the brass tacks. You had to have the gold in the ground, the silver in the ground. You had to have the drill results to prove that. When you get down to the nitty gritty with mining companies, it's not that complicated. It's when they start talking all the pie in the sky stuff that things get
Interesting.
convoluted.
Yeah,
You
I think
know,
a lot of them can talk the talk, but not. I mean, I'm sure a lot of them also walk the walk, but that's the takeaway there. Actually, that leads us into the next topic. Ironically enough, do you have any stories or insights from managing these large in-person and also virtual events, and maybe some insights on how do these guide today's corporate investor conferences, presentations, lessons learned, best practices, etc.?
sure, sure. Well, we tried a few things. Some of them worked, some of them did not. So we quickly learned that it's really hard to get people to come in person to do anything, and that's only gotten increasingly difficult. So it's important to create a multi-layer approach to your outreach. The conference really needs to have an in-person aspect, because some people love to get in the face of a CEO and ask him a question straight to his face and see how he reacts. That's how you're really going to learn some things about a company, having a really personal conversation with the head guy and seeing what he says, asking him tough questions, seeing how he answers them. Is he honest? Is he looking shifty? So a lot of people love to come have that in-person contact, but some people don't like to do that. Some people like to be very passive in how they ingest that kind of information. And so it's important that you also have record everything, make it accessible to people online. And back in the early 2000s, that was not an easy thing to do. YouTube
Mhm.
really wasn't there, and getting that kind of information out was difficult. So we did it kind of the hard way. We recorded things and we would put them on CDs sometimes and send those CDs out to people. I mean, it was really clunky and cumbersome, but it worked, and we had huge attendance. I mean, we would regularly turn people away because we couldn't fit anymore. We'd exceeded our fire marshal head count. So I mean, that's a good thing, makes
Yeah,
for
it's a good thing.
good pictures. So, but anyway, so we learned that was important. You got to reach people on the level that they want to engage with you at. So I and that model's been embraced pretty much at this point. People got it figured out, but mining conferences and investor conferences in general have really suffered quite a bit and gotten smaller over time. I think there was a heyday where there was so many people doing what we did, and there were shows everywhere, and it got kind of just saturated, and sticking our guns in Chicago because we were the only people doing any shows out of Chicago. And so we kind of had that market cornered, which kept us insulated and well
I see.
attended. So, I
Well,
went,
that makes sense, right? You have the area, Chicago, I'm sure, it's still the options mecca, so to say. And then over time, right, those lessons from, I wouldn't even imagine it, like taking the CDs, recording the presentation, just shipping that out. Today, it seems, I don't think that would work. Probably over time, it's those little things. It's like, how can you maximize outreach and marketing? And I think, whether that, what's the right word? It was innovative, right, at the time. Something I never thought of. Recording the entire conference, send it out. You have your outreach, just little things like that. Lessons learned from growing the conference into what it is now, and then even as you mentioned, the trends and what you do now with your work in making these conferences into multi-platform experiences. I think that's a new dynamic too that maybe we could touch on. Like, what was the transition like over time? You mentioned less in person, more outreach, but more flexible in a way where it's to a wider audience. Could you elaborate on that?
sure. So, we really focused on trying to keep our in-person events really the forefront of what we did. And that lasted really up until 2020 when the COVID pandemic happened, and that really, it just changed everything, and we did a show in 2020. That was the first show we did after COVID, and again back in Chicago. And this time we had we live streamed some of the event so people could watch live. We tried to do question and answer, and that's gotten easier now, but it was still a little bit weird then, taking questions over the internet and asking them to like our panel that we had up there, because we always do panel discussions where we have a different topic and we have a bunch of different experts up there and fire questions at them. We always had a moderator up there, usually my dad. Sometimes it was my partner Chris Temple. But it was really tough on that time back in 2022. Really kind of unfortunately solidified our idea to take a different path with our business plan.
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah. And you know it's unfortunate because we worked so hard for so many years to make that event what it was, and it was really sad to see it kind of go by the wayside, and it just wasn't what people wanted to do anymore, was to come be in person at those types of events. So that's when we started saying, oh, we have all these relationships, we know what works and what doesn't, so what can we do now to still help companies we have relationships with still target new audiences and find new investors? So that's when, Chris Temple and I, who was a friend of my father's way back into the late 90s, and he's been our moderator on many of our events in Chicago. And he does his own newsletter called The National Investor. Check that out if you haven't. He's a great guy. He writes some amazing commentary, makes some amazing calls on the market. But so we put our heads together and we're like, well, we got to do something different here. So let's try to take all these things that we've learned over the years and form a new company that focuses on getting, small and micro cap companies, mainly focused on natural resources, biotechnology, and some technology, and help those companies get their word out using what we've already spent a couple of decades to figure out ourselves.
Interesting. I see.
So that's what kind of led to the dawn and the creation of strategic media and public relations, which is what we run today, and that's how it all came to be. So it's kind of a wild story, and it was a wild road along the way, I tell you.
No, I can imagine. And actually, on that note, I think you moved us to the final topic of the show. And I do want to throw in one kind of bonus one too. I want to learn more about strategic media and how you've helped transform these traditional in-person expos into dynamic multi-platform experiences with the work you're doing there. But also on that same coin, from all the years either doing the Chicago Resource Expo to the work you're doing now, what are some of the key value adds that conference participants have said, like, hey, I really love the conferences you put on because of X, say it's the people I meet there, the panels you put on. What would you say are the top or the most prominent feedback where it's like, hey, this is what I took away and this is what I found most valuable throughout the years for the attendees?
Sure. Honestly, what people love more than anything was getting a group of people together that were all very intelligent, that weren't afraid to say what they really thought and really put their money where their mouth was and be open and free about the discussion we were having. And that was what really our show focused on. We let people have all the leash that they wanted to speak openly and freely about what they thought of a company, what they thought about the economy going forward, what they thought about inflation, what they thought about the world's need for natural resources and where in the heck all of them were going to come from, the nuts and bolts of all this stuff. It was the frank conversations that we had, and focusing mainly on, we always did a Friday night show and then a Saturday. And our Friday night question and answer panel discussion was our most heavily attended event of both days. That's when the conference room was full and people were standing up in the back, and that's what people came for year after year, was that high energy Friday night conversation we had. And it would start at 7 p.m. and we had the run of that hotel. Sometimes those conversations, we would keep the event going till 10 to 10:30 in the conference room, and then the hotel would be like, hey, we gotta shut you guys down. But then we would organize everything to kind of move to the bar in the hotel, and the conversations would continue there. And I mean, it was just this great energy and this great flow, and people love that, man. People love that. and and,
That's
and
impressive, yeah.
and we gave people a chance to go sit side by side next to like James Turk or Mike Metz that used to work for Oppenheimer. I mean, we had some really dynamite, big time people come to our events, and it gave you a chance to sit down and have a drink with these people and pick their brains, and it was just very sort of informal in that respect. But that's what people loved about it. We weren't too hoity-toity. We made everything approachable, and I think that's probably what the key was. It is the approachability of the overall event and the openness that we allowed people to have engagement-wise with our guest speakers, our company CEOs that would come, spread their wares about what their company had going on. Everybody talked, and it was just a really intimate, engaging event where free thought took place. And a lot of amazing things happened there. A lot of companies cut their teeth at our show. We had a lot of financings done at our show. We raised a lot of money for startups. I mean, it was some great energy, man. And I think that was probably the key, is just the energy we brought behind it. We weren't boring. We weren't stale. Some things were in your face. Some things were slightly controversial, but we kept it on the rails. And I think that was really the key to our events, was just the overall
Really
intimate
powerful
nature.
stuff.
Yeah, it was great. It was a great time. We tried to keep that energy going with what we do today, just kind of in a different way, more on a virtual level now, with our outreach to the world with what we're doing.
I wholeheartedly agree. I like what you mentioned. You brought intelligent, passionate people all into the same room where they can all have an honest conversation, kept it engaging, kept everything approachable, and really added the value add panels, etc. Really well said. I think on that note too, we can move on to strategic media and public relations, which the work you do there, the goal. The floor is yours again.
Sure. Thanks, Justin. So, yeah, it's been 2 years now since we kicked off strategic media and public relations, and so what we do basically is, any small company is definitely trying to get their story heard, right? And when you're dealing with a small mining company specifically, that can be extremely challenging, because so many of those companies only have, drill results, a good piece of land in an area that has favorable mining regulations. So, you have to pick apart, a relatively small amount of information to create a larger story that gives people a long-term vision of what this company is trying to achieve. and why it's going to work. And so over the years, we came to know what all those different facets were that made these companies be successful, or more importantly, what the pitfalls were along the way that made companies fail.
Mhm.
And because more often than not, with a small cap junior mining company, they're going to fail. I think maybe 1 in 10 ever actually, and I think that number's even gotten worse,
Oh,
ever
wow.
actually take their mine into production. So we're really good about looking at the nuts and bolts of a company, looking at the management of the company, because when you're dealing with a small company, man, the management. I mean, they're the jockey riding the horse, and if
Yeah.
if they don't know how to ride that horse perfectly, they're not going to win. And so you got to really have a good relationship with management, and management's got to know what the heck they're doing. And then at the same time, like I said, the jurisdiction in which they're operating has to be favorable for their business model. So, if you're trying to build a gold mining company like in somewhere in Central California, where there's a ton of restrictions on what they can do because of endangered species, local state park, all that kind of thing, that's a high risk situation, and those are things that we try to avoid.
Mhm.
We've uh, come to be really aware of all the different favorable mining jurisdictions within the United States, Canada, Mexico, and really over the world for that matter. That's kind of what we try to do, is to break down all those different things and make them make sense to people, and tell a story about that in a way that people can understand. Because not everybody is a mining analyst and knows
Yeah.
what ounces per ton means, and all these different parts of geochemistry, and how much does it cost to get the gold out of the rock based on the geochemistry of the rock. And I mean, it gets thick real quick. So that's what we do with strategic NPR. We dissect these companies in a way, and create a story around them that people can understand and digest. At the same time, we're somewhat technical in what we discuss, and how we discuss it, but we don't get too in the weeds with it, so that the average person can understand what we're talking.
Excellent. So it's like consulting focused in the mining space. From your years of experience, you guys were the subject matter experts from navigating all these regulations, knowing the sites, just knowing the people in the business. I see.
Sure.
It's niche, but a definite value add, and that's incredible. And like you said, I know that'll be successful in the future because it's there's a
No,
need
I
for it. It's a value add. It sounds like a great place.
hey, like the old saying goes, if you don't grow it, you got to mine it. It's the need for mining is never going to stop. Our ability to do it responsibly with the environment, and to do it respectfully with any neighboring people, whether it be like First Nations in Canada, or somebody down in here in the States, where there's you have to do things right. And so we take that into account as well, because that's an important part of the detail. Because if companies don't have that part of their business on the up and up, where they're really respecting the environment that they're coming into to be extractive from, then that's bad math.
Yeah.
And so and so that's part of our conversation that we have now with our clients and our hopefully prospective investors, is you have to pay attention to a lot of moving parts. But if you do your homework and get a little bit lucky, I mean, the stock market is there is no guarantees.
It's got its ups and
Never
downs.
you never say guarantee in the stock market. It's like this bad word. So and it's there, and it's that way for a reason, man. So we're passionate about what we do. We know why we love it so much, because it's been in our blood for such a long time, and it just comes naturally to me. I love
Okay.
talking about it. I love talking to people about it. I love explaining it. And now, so that's kind of what we do now. We've kind of taken all that brain power, and started different social media networks that we operate for our clients. We have huge outreach to different journalists all around the world. We have, we're getting involved more with different influencers that talk
Hmm.
about what we're engaged with. And we're just taking a new approach on some of the old knowledge that we have, and marrying those things and that's what we've done with Strategic MPR, and that's our strive going forward, just to continue what we're doing, and just keep loving it, man, because
Yeah,
people can hear that, and that's what we're going to do.
really well said. The passion in your voice, it really comes through when you're talking about it as well. And the results speak for themselves. From getting the fire marshals called up, and selling out hotels.
Hey,
It's truly success. I love it. The
got
events
it
and
done.
attendees speak for themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great stuff.
I think on that note, we're kind of running down the home stretch now. We do use this as an opportunity, for our guest. If you had any advice, lessons learned, passionate topics, regardless of topic, do you have anything to share with the audience?
Sure. Well, I'm trying to think of like something that's been really emotional for me, that was really something that taught me a lot,
Yeah.
because there was some bumpy roads, man. If I was going to say anything to somebody out there, I would say, if you're an investment advisor, a financial analyst advisor, there's several different monikers we put on those people. Once upon a time it was stockbroker, but now that's like a red letter term. Nobody even wants to say that anymore. It's like bad guy. But anyway, I would say, anybody in in the industry, uh, you know, dot your I's, cross your T's, and because there's so many ways out there that you can get in trouble by speaking your mind and being open about what your thoughts are, and you really have to kind of rein that in, because it's unfortunate, that the industry has done what it's done. But that's what I would probably say. Once upon a time, people got to tell stories, brokers got to tell their client stories and why they should buy a stock. And now that's not the case. Now you got to listen to you got to listen to the attorneys in your firm as to which mutual funds you're allowed to sell to your clients. And recommending an individual stock anymore is something that's very taboo, and shouldn't, and really is really frowned upon. Just, you got to really watch what you say out there.
Mm-hmm.
So keep the cards close to your chest. I'll leave it at that.
I like it. Yeah. Dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure you're compliant. Yeah. Well said. Mr. Radis, on that note, if our audience wanted to reach out to you or learn more about strategic media, where should they go? What should they do?
Sure. Please visit our website. It's strategicmpr.com. We also have a podcast that we operate that Chris Temple does live a lot of time. We have I forget how many episodes we have right now, but it's Your Money Today. That's available on Apple Music and all the other different podcast platforms. So make sure you check that out. And if anybody ever wants to reach out to me, please send me an email. My direct email address is smprteam@strategicmpr.com. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you for
Well
the
said.
opportunity, Justin. I appreciate it very much, man.
No, thank you, honestly. And then, like I said, Mr. Radis, honestly, thank you for joining the show. We look forward to hearing from you again and seeing how your ventures progress. I'm sure our audience will be contacting you for the questions about investor conferences, partnerships. And then to our audience, I want to thank you again for joining us on another episode of Approaching Infinity. Bye for now.
Take care.